Thank you, Senator Thwaite. Senator Macdonald.
Mr Acting Deputy President, any amendment to legislation that assists our border control and our defence forces in dealing with the protection and security of our borders should be supported. This bill would be supported without qualification if it made clear that the amendments would in fact ensure that Australian officials had all of the right powers to do it. As I understand the bill, though, Mr Acting Deputy President, and as I understand the report of the Senate committee looking into the bill, there is some uncertainty on whether the provisions of this bill will actually take away from Australian enforcement agencies some of the rights which they currently enjoy. And to that end, as Senator Payne has said in leading the debate, the Coalition will be moving some amendments to make absolutely certain, to clarify the fact that, should it be necessary, Australian officers and officials and agencies will be able to turn around boats. Now, Mr Acting Deputy President, you don't need a West Australian state election to highlight the fact that most Australians are appalled at the current government's complete inability and, it seems, disinterest in stopping illegal arrivals to our country. And, Mr Acting Deputy President, there is good reasons why Australia should have an ordered immigration program and an ordered refugee program. And I say particularly to the Greens political party when this issue is raised, what do you say to the tens of millions of UHRC-determined refugees living in squalid detention camps, refugee camps right around the world, who are patiently waiting for their turn to come into Australia in accordance with the United Nations and Australian rules? Because every one of those who comes to Australia illegally means that those who are waiting in the queue in these squalid detention camps, refugee camps around the world, they are put back another year because of people coming here illegally. And I say to the Greens political party, when all you rail about that, when you get on TV and shed the crocodile tears, what do you say to those people waiting their turn in the refugee camps around the world? These are people who have been determined by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees to be genuine refugees. They are people who, when spaces become available in Australia, Canada, United States, Europe, New Zealand, they take their turn. But with illegal people, or with people arriving here illegally, those people are put back. Never once have I heard the Greens, or the Labor Party for that matter, address that position. And that's why it is essential, Mr Acting Deputy President, that we do in fact have laws that do enable Australian agencies to deter those who would enter our country illegally. Now, Mr Acting Deputy President, I want to refer to just a couple of quotations that sort of should indicate the depth of support for effective means of deterring illegal entrance to our country. I quote a former Labor leader, who I well expect might be the next Labor leader, and perhaps I don't know what's happened this morning in caucus. Have we had a change of leadership yet, or is that for next Tuesday? But anyhow, Mr Rudd said before the 2000 election, and I quote, "Labor would take asylum seekers who've been rescued from leaky boats to Christmas Island and would turn back seaworthy vessels containing such people on the high seas. You'd turn them back," Mr Rudd said, "of boats approaching Australia," emphasising that Labor believed in an orderly immigration system to be enforced by deterrents. Now, who could disagree with that? In fact, Mr Rudd was enumerating the Howard government's position, and Mr Rudd was saying what I think most people, and the people of Western Australia have clearly demonstrated this on the weekend, that's what most Australians would expect. But what's happened under the Gillard government, and indeed the Rudd government, talk's always pretty cheap for the Labor Party, but you know, have a look at what their actions are. Since Labor's been in power, there have been an enormous increase. Some 33,495 people have arrived under Labor's watch, and they've arrived by entering Australia in a way that is not authorised by law. Mr Acting Deputy President, there have been 570 boats since Labor was in power. In this year alone, in 2013, we've already had 1,500 arrivals. In 2012, 25,000 people entered Australia in this fashion, contrary to the law. Now, I want to make it clear, Mr Acting Deputy President, the Coalition is not against immigration. We are certainly not against refugee intake. In fact, we, along with I think all political parties in Australia, welcome immigration, and importantly, we do our share in taking into our country genuine refugees who have been so determined by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. And, Mr Acting Deputy President, so we should. I think all Australians appreciate that. In fact, Australia on a per capita basis is one of the most generous countries in bringing in genuine refugees. But that's why, Mr Acting Deputy President, we do need a proper deterrence so that people who perhaps, and I make no determination, but there is certainly suggestions that a lot of people coming in are not refugees, are not in fear of their life or their liberty, but are looking for a better life. And I don't blame them for looking for a better life, but we do have rules and regulations, and we have a very genuine and generous refugee program that should be enforced. And so, Mr Acting Deputy President, you have this situation now where the current government has completely lost control of the borders. There is sometimes some debate on whether you can turn boats around safely. Well, can I refer senators to the evidence given by the distinguished seaman who is now Chief of Navy, Rear Admiral Griggs, who gave evidence at a Senate Estimates Committee, I think it was in the budget estimates last year, where he explained how, as what I think he referred to himself at the time as a mere patrol boat captain at the time, he explained how he did turn boats around. That was in the Howard years, of course. He also explained, I might say, Mr Acting Deputy President, in fairness, that on some instances that wasn't possible. But he did say, and it's on the record, on how you can turn boats around, and of course that's what happened in the Howard years. And you know the impact that had, Mr Acting Deputy President? Those who would spend, what, 10, 15, 20,000, I don't know what the going rate is, but a lot of money to pay criminals, people smugglers, to come into the country, if they knew that the government was serious about enforcing the protection of our borders, they wouldn't spend, what, up to $60,000, $100,000 for their family to come into Australia by these illegal means if they knew they were just going to be put straight on a plane and sent back, or if they knew that the boat they were on was going to be turned around. They would not come. And that would have a couple of results, Mr Acting Deputy President. It, of course, would mean that 1,000 people who've already lost their lives by coming to Australia on leaky boats that shouldn't set foot to sea, boats that are run by criminals who are ipso facto supported by the Labor Party's inconsistent ability to control and their inability to control their borders. Those 1,000 people might still have been alive today if there had have been a deterrence which said to those people, if you want to come to Australia, do it in the right way, make the application like other people do, or if you're a genuine refugee, abide by the rules of the UNHCR and Australia for bringing in those people. Now, Mr Acting Deputy President, if this bill did what the minister in his second reading speech indicated that it would, then it is of course a bill which the coalition would unequivocally support. There is, however, Mr Acting Deputy President, this thought that it may be that the consolidation of various rules actually takes away some of the ability of our enforcement agencies to properly protect our border. I note, Mr Acting Deputy President, that there was a dissenting report into the Senate's inquiry into this piece of legislation, and coalition senators reported that this legislation may represent a surreptitious attempt to remove the Commonwealth's powers to turn back unauthorised boats as part of an effective border control policy. And, Mr Acting Deputy President, I think members of the minority report indicated that the term surreptitious was used because agency witnesses before the committee were unable to state whether this power was preserved in the bill. Now, that's a bit of a worry, Mr Acting Deputy President, and that's why the coalition will be moving amendments to make sure that the ability, to make sure that the powers are there to allow authorised officers to actually turn boats back where it's safe to do so. Similarly, I understand, Mr Acting Deputy President, the committee ascertained that powers of stopping, manoeuvring and chasing and detaining vessels in clauses 54 and 69 are silent on the question of turning back those vessels. So, Mr Acting Deputy President, I would hope that those amendments, when they are moved, will receive the support of at least the Labor Party, because, again, I refer to senators from the Labor Party to the principles enunciated by Mr Rudd when he was then their leader about the powers that were needed. I also refer senators, Mr Acting Deputy President, to some parts of the Houston report which looked into this issue some months ago, and senators might recall that the Houston's report fourth principle is this, and I quote, "Turning around a vessel would need to be conducted consistently with Australia's obligations under the SOLAS Convention, particularly in relation to those on board, mindful also of safety of those Australian officers, officials and Defence Force personnel involved in such operations." So again, recognising that there are indeed times when vessels can be turned around. As I said, there are examples of it. It happened during the Howard years. And what happened during the Howard years? The flow of illegal arrivals to Australia stopped because people realised that if they're paying out $50,000 to $100,000 to get people in here, it might all be in vain if they were actually dealt with in the way that that the Australian officials had powers to do. So, Mr Acting Deputy President, we are a generous country when it comes to entrance into Australia as refugees. There are so many people who have been determined to be refugees waiting in squalid refugee camps around the world, who every time an illegal arrival comes puts them back yet another year. And I think that's something that we do have to address, Mr Acting Deputy President. So I would urge the senators in this chamber to make it quite clear that this bill does enhance powers, not detract from them. So I said at the beginning, you don't need a West Australian election to tell you that people around Australia are concerned about the porous nature of our borders. If Ms Gillard spoke to any genuine people in Western Sydney last week, they would have told her. They would have told her that they, like every other Australian, believes that our borders should be secure. We should have a regular immigration system and a refugee system that does work and is ordered and well determined. So, Mr Acting President, I would urge senators, when the time comes, to support the Coalition's amendment to make sure that our officials do have the maximum powers to properly enforce our laws.
Thank you, Senator Macdonald. Senator